Sometimes it's not always immediately obvious until you fit the slab in there exactly what sections need to be scratched. If you're ever in doubt, measure it again. It never hurts. Double check. I'm a little bit neurotic. I tend to check several times. I grew up with a whole family of carpenters, and that whole measure twice, cut once mantra was drilled into me from a very early age. So I tend to check and check and check. Which is never a bad thing. Move this last piece into place. Back along that last inside seam, paint that slip in there really good. Remember, all of this we can clean up, and we will clean up later to make sure the inside of that box is nice and pristine. But for right now, we're just worried about making sure that all comes together. Now if you find that you have a couple little spots that you need to shave off before assembling that top, you can do that now. You can do that either with your knife or with the Sureform tool, whichever one you're more competent with. I got this one corner just a little bit off, so I'm just shaving him a little bit. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. You'll be surprised when you go to clean it up how rough your box will look before you start, and how pristine you'll really be able to get it by the time it's finished. So now we're ready to rough up the top. Scratch and slip, scratch and slip, scratch and slip anytime you join two pieces of clay together. Don't worry about the mess you're making of the slabs now. All this will be cleaned up later. But if this isn't done, you'll be really fighting cracks later. So take the time to really do it properly now. Clay loves to be organic. It doesn't necessarily automatically lend itself to geometric straight forms, so we really have to work with it and let it know what it is that we expect from it for it to give us what we need. Okay, I've got that liberally covered, sorry. So I'm going to take my last edge and this one's so big I'm going to scratch it right on the table, so trying to hold it in my hands. Do the same thing, scratch that inside edge, make sure it's really well scored. Remember, any marks you make now can be cleaned up later, as well as the residual canvas texture will be cleaned up later. We'll be scraping down the whole exterior edge of the box in the cleanup process, so don't worry about what small textures you may have left in the slabs in working with it. I'm going to add slip liberally to the top piece now. We're essentially creating a closed form to begin with, and then once this has all had a chance to equalize, then we'll be cutting the lid and forming the flange. But it's much easier to get two pieces to line up exactly if they started out as one piece and you then cut them apart, rather than trying to make two separate pieces that fit together exactly afterward. You can go ahead and fit that piece right on top. Make sure you press down, give it a good amount of pressure. Make sure you really see that slip working out of those joins. Make sure that really fits down the way you want. You may need to rotate it and work each seam individually. Now, the box that I've created looks very rough and not perfect at all at this point. We're going to do a lot of refining to it later. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some coils of clay and work those into each one of the seams. I've got some clay, soft clay here, and I'm going to take and roll out some coils, just like we have when we've joined other pieces together. We want to add that coil of wet clay in there into each one of these seams. Really press it in there. That way, as the piece dries, that coil will suck up into that crack and will keep you from having a divot later where that seam and the slip has shrunk. Now, I'm not going to make you watch me do every single seam on this box because it is a lengthy process. But I want to show you two sides so you can see exactly where that needs to be done. And I'm really adding pressure, really smushing that clay into those seams. Remember, we're going to clean all this up later, so don't worry about how much of a mess you're making of it now. It will look very rough at this point. That's okay, because we're going to refine it further. You see that slip smushing out of that joint, that's fine. Use that slip to our advantage. All that slip smushing out will keep those little coils in place, and your coils don't have to be perfect either. You're just trying to work clay into those seams. Think of your clay coils as putty. You're working into the cracks that you'll clean off later. And these overhangs here will be pinwheeled. Our slabs, all of that overhang will be trimmed off later as well. Okay, I finished adding the coils. I'm going to wrap it up in plastic and set it aside for a couple hours to let the moisture in those seams equalize. And then we can continue with refining it and cutting and adding the lid and flange.